Ambassador Tailvori had served on the Galactic Council for 400 years. She had watched empires crumble. She had seen species destroy themselves with their own foolishness. She had survived 3 wars, 2 plagues, and a diplomatic crisis that nearly split the galaxy in half. Nothing surprised her anymore. Then the humans arrived. She remembered the day clearly. The council chamber on Valith Prime was a magnificent place. It was carved from living crystal that hummed with the voices of 312 species. Every seat was arranged in perfect order. Every delegate wore the formal colors of their world. Every word spoken followed 10,000 years of tradition. And then Captain Jonah Mwangi walked in wearing combat boots. Not fashionably late, not strategically late, but genuinely, honestly late, because, as he explained with a wide grin to the horrified protocol secretary, his ship had stopped to rescue a damaged cargo vessel near the Drexy border. Couldn't just fly past them, he said, as if that explained everything. It did not explain everything. Tailvori watched him from her elevated seat. She was Keth, tall and thin, with 6 limbs that folded elegantly beneath her diplomatic robes. Her species had helped found the council. They were known for patience, wisdom, and the ability to sit through a 9-hour budget debate without blinking. She studied the human the way a scientist might study a new and possibly dangerous animal. Mwangi was not what she expected. He was tall for his kind, with dark skin and a shaved head and a smile that seemed permanently fixed to his face. He carried a metal container that released a bitter, burnt smell into the chamber. Several delegates wrinkled their noses. The Villani ambassador, whose species communicated partly through scent, looked like she might faint. "What is that substance?" Tailvori asked quietly. "Coffee," Mwangi said, raising the container like a toast. "Want some?" She did not want some. More importantly, stimulants in the council chamber were considered a mild diplomatic insult in at least 47 cultures. Mwangi either did not know this or did not care. Tailvori suspected it was both. Humanity had been a provisional member of the council for only 2 standard cycles. They were new. They were small. Their territory covered a tiny corner of the Orion Arm, barely a speck compared to the vast empires of the Ulhari Combine or the ancient holdings of the Keth. By every measure that mattered, they were insignificant. And yet they made everyone nervous. It was not their military. Their fleet was decent but unremarkable. They had borrowed most of it from the Drexy in exchange for something called pizza recipes. It was something else, something harder to name. The Keth Intelligence Bureau had spent months trying to define it, and had eventually settled on a single word: unpredictable. Humans did things that made no sense. They formed emotional attachments to other species within days of meeting them. They gave away resources for no clear benefit. They named their warships after flowers, and their hospitals after warriors. They kept animals in their homes for no purpose other than companionship. They laughed at danger, cried at music, and seemed to experience every emotion at maximum volume at all times. Tailvori found it exhausting. The session that day was supposed to be routine. A trade dispute had been simmering between the Ulhari Combine and the Drexy Shoals for months. The Ulhari wanted higher tariffs on Drexy crystal exports. The Drexy wanted access to Ulhari shipping lanes. Both sides had been arguing in circles for so long that most delegates had stopped listening. Then, the Ulhari ambassador slammed his massive fist on his podium. "We will impose sanctions," he growled. "Full economic blockade, effective immediately." The chamber went silent. Sanctions were serious. They could cripple the Drexy economy within a year. The Drexy ambassador, a small aquatic creature speaking through a translator, trembled in her water-filled chair. No one moved. This was not their problem. Council tradition was clear. species handled their own disputes unless formally asked to intervene. No one had been formally asked. Mwangi raised his hand. Tailvori closed her eyes. Here it comes, she thought. Hey, quick question, the human said, standing up without being recognized by the speaker. Another breach of protocol. Has anyone actually looked at a map? The chamber stared at him. Mwangi pulled out a small device and projected a holographic star map into the air above his seat. It was rough, hand-drawn, clearly made on the spot. See, the Olhari want to protect their shipping lanes, right? And the Drexi need a route to the outer markets. But there is a whole corridor right here, he pointed with his coffee container, that nobody is using because it passes through a dead system. No resources, no strategic value. Everyone ignores it. But if you build one relay station, just one, both sides get what they want. Olhari keep their lanes private. Drexi get a new route that is actually shorter. Everyone wins. Silence. The Olhari ambassador blinked his 4 eyes. Why would you suggest this? You have no stake in this dispute. Mwangi shrugged. Seemed like a waste to let people fight over something fixable. Tailvori watched the reactions spread through the chamber. Confusion. Suspicion. The Drexi ambassador whispered to her aide. The Olhari studied the map with narrowed eyes. Several elder delegates exchanged looks that said the same thing. What is wrong with this species? No one in the history of the Council had ever volunteered to solve someone else's problem for free. It was not done. It was not how the galaxy worked. Every favor had a price. Every alliance had conditions. Every act of generosity was an investment. Except, apparently, when humans did it. The dispute was resolved within a week. The relay station was approved. Both sides quietly admitted the solution was elegant. And Mwangi went back to drinking his coffee, as if he had not just casually untangled a conflict that had lasted 3 years. That evening, Tailvori updated the Keth Intelligence Bureau's file on humanity. She stared at the classification for a long time, before adding a single note beneath it. Approach with caution. She paused, then added one more line. They solve problems that are not theirs. Unknown motive. Possibly dangerous. She saved the file and sat in silence. Outside her window, the lights of Valith Prime stretched to the horizon, steady and ancient and orderly. Somewhere below, she knew, the human delegation was probably doing something loud and inappropriate and completely baffling. She was right. They were teaching the Drexi ambassador's children how to play soccer in the embassy courtyard. Tailvori closed her eyes and wondered what the galaxy had gotten itself into. The answer came 3 days later, when the Deep Space Communication Array picked up a signal from the hollow expanse, a region of space so old and so empty that no species had entered it in over 4,000 years. The signal was faint. It was repeating, and it was not a call for help. It was a warning. Something ancient was waking up, and the galaxy, with all its order and tradition and careful diplomacy, was about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous thing in the universe is not the monster in the dark. It is the species that runs toward it. The warning signal from the hollow expanse played on loop in the council chamber for 6 hours before anyone understood what it meant. It was old. Older than most species in the room. Older than the council itself. The language had been dead for millennia, and it took the combined efforts of 12 translation teams to decode it. When they did, the chamber went cold. Do not enter. Do not wake them. If they wake, run. The Yithkari swarm had been a nightmare from a forgotten age. Ancient records described them as a hive species, billions of creatures sharing one mind, consuming everything in their path, worlds, stations, entire civilizations. They had nearly ended all life in the galaxy before something, no one knew what, put them to sleep. Now they were awake. The first reports came from the frontier colonies. A Drexy mining outpost went silent. Then, a Keth observation station. Then 3 more colonies in rapid succession. The pattern was simple and terrifying. The swarm arrived. The swarm consumed. The swarm moved on. There was no communication, no demands, no negotiation, just hunger. The council called an emergency war summit. Talvori watched the delegates argue from her seat. The elder species had a plan. They always had a plan. It was called the Doctrine of Measured Response, and it had been the council's military framework for 8,000 years. It was careful. It was organized. It involved committees, subcommittees, fleet coordination agreements, supply chain assessments, and a projected deployment timeline of 40 standard days. Captain Mwangi listened to the entire presentation. Then he stood up. With respect, he said, and Talvori immediately knew that whatever followed would contain no respect at all. Those colonies will be bones in 40 days. The chamber erupted. The speaker called for order. The Ulhari ambassador demanded Mwangi be censured for undiplomatic language. A formal complaint was filed. Mwangi was asked to sit down and let the professionals handle this. He sat down. He also sent a message to Earth. 72 hours later, without council authorization, without formal approval, without telling anyone, the Terran 9th Expeditionary Fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel directly into the hollow expanse and opened fire on the Yithkari swarm. Talvori heard the news in her private chamber. She set down her tea with trembling hands. They did what? They engaged the swarm, Ambassador, her aide said. Alone. Without authorization. Yes. Without support. Yes. Without a plan? Her aide hesitated. They appear to have a plan. It is just not a very good one. The battle was chaos. The swarm was massive. Thousands of organic ships, moving as one mind. The Terran fleet was a fraction of the size. They should have been destroyed in minutes. But humans, Talvori was learning, did not do what they should. The fleet commander, Admiral Chen, used tactics that no species in the galaxy had seen before. When Terran ships were damaged beyond repair, the crews evacuated, and then rammed the empty hulls into swarm hive nodes at full speed. When the swarm adapted to their weapons, the humans vented their own atmosphere and used the explosive decompression to create hull fires that burned through swarm boarding parties. When conventional communication jamming failed against the swarm's hive mind signals, a lieutenant on the destroyer Crazy Horse started broadcasting human music on all frequencies. It was heavy metal. It was very loud. And against all logic, against all science, against everything the galaxy understood about the Yithkari, it worked. The swarm's coordination shattered in the area around the broadcast. Creatures that had moved as one mind began crashing into each other. The hivelink could not process the noise. What is that sound? The Drexy intelligence officer monitoring the battle asked. I believe they call it Metallica, her colleague replied. The humans saved 3 colonies that day. They pulled survivors from burning stations. They evacuated thousands of civilians from species that had never asked for their help. Mwangi himself flew a rescue shuttle into a collapsing orbital platform to retrieve a Keth family trapped on the lower decks. It was heroic. It was brave. It was also a complete disaster. In the process of saving those colonies, the Terran fleet accidentally destroyed a Drexy listening post that had been gathering intelligence on the swarm. They violated the sovereign space of 2 council species without permission. They left behind a debris field so massive that it disrupted shipping routes for 3 systems. And one of their damaged ships, drifting without power, crashed into an Ulhari communications satellite that had been in orbit for 600 years. The council was furious. 17 formal protests were filed in a single day. The Ulhari Combine called for humanity's immediate expulsion from the council. The Drexy demanded reparations for their destroyed listening post. Even species that had been friendly to humans were angry. There were rules, there were procedures, there was a way things were done. Humans had ignored all of it. Talvori sat in the emergency session and listened to the accusations pile up. Reckless, dangerous, undisciplined, barbaric. Every word was true. She had watched the battle recordings. She had seen the ramming tactics, the hull fires, the insane music broadcasts. It was ugly. It was everything the council stood against. But she had also seen something else. She had seen the swarm retreat. In all of recorded history, across thousands of years and hundreds of civilizations, no one had ever made the Yithkari retreat. The swarm consumed. That was what it did. It did not stop. It did not hesitate. It did not run. Until now. Talvori kept this thought to herself. It did not seem like the right time to share it. Mwangi sat through the accusations without speaking. When the session ended, he walked out of the chamber with the same easy stride he always had. A group of reporters surrounded him in the corridor. "Captain Mwangi, do you have any response to the council's formal censure?" He stopped. He looked tired. There was a burn mark on his uniform from the rescue shuttle. His coffee container was dented. He thought for a moment. 3 colonies are still standing. 12,000 people are alive who would not be. You can put that on one side of the scale and put your paperwork on the other, and you tell me which weighs more. He walked away. That night, Talvori received the latest intelligence briefing. She read it 3 times to make sure she understood. The swarm had not just retreated. It had adapted. Its movements were changing. It was no longer expanding in random directions. It was targeting specific systems. Systems connected to humanity. Systems where humans had allies, friends, or trade partners. The Yithkari hive mind, ancient and vast and cold, had identified the humans as the primary threat, and it was now hunting them. Talvori put down the briefing and stared at the wall of her chamber. The humans had saved 3 colonies and made themselves the target of an extinction-level enemy. They had kicked the nest, and now the entire galaxy would deal with the swarm of angry creatures that came pouring out. She updated her file on humanity. The worst allies the galaxy has ever had. They break every rule, ignore every protocol, and create more problems than they solve. She paused. Her hand hovered over the screen. And they are the only ones who have ever made the swarm afraid. She saved the file and turned off the lights. Sleep did not come easily. Somewhere out in the dark between the stars, the swarm was moving with new purpose, and the galaxy's most reckless species had just painted a target on everyone it had ever helped. Talvori wondered if the humans understood what they had done. She suspected they did. She also suspected they would do it again. The council split in 2. It happened slowly at first, then all at once. In the weeks after the Terran fleet's unauthorized attack on the swarm, every species in the galaxy was forced to answer a simple question. Were the humans heroes or criminals? The Alhari ambassador led the expulsion block. He was a massive creature, built like a mountain covered in gray armor plating, and he spoke with the kind of cold fury that could silence a room. Humanity had violated council law. They had entered sovereign space without permission. They had destroyed allied property. They had acted alone without authorization, and they had dragged the entire galaxy into a war with an ancient enemy that might have been contained if proper procedures had been followed. "Remove them," he said at every session, "before they get us all killed." On the other side was the pragmatist faction. It was smaller, quieter, and led, reluctantly, by Talvori. She wanted to sit in her chamber and drink tea and read intelligence reports. But the numbers were clear. The swarm was growing. It was consuming colony after colony along the frontier. and the Council's doctrine of measured response was failing. Fleets arrived too late, defenses crumbled too easily. Species that had not fought a real war in centuries had forgotten how. The only force that had ever pushed the swarm back was human. Talvori made this argument carefully, diplomatically, with centuries of political skill. It did not matter. The expulsion bloc had the votes. Then Earth made a decision that surprised everyone. Captain Mwangi was recalled. The official statement said he was needed for strategic consultation. The Council breathed a collective sigh of relief. The loud, reckless, coffee-drinking human was gone. In his place arrived Dr. Lena Osei. Dr. Osei was everything the Council wanted in a diplomat. She was calm. She spoke softly and listened carefully. She wore proper diplomatic attire instead of combat boots. She brought no coffee to the chamber. She addressed every species by their correct honorific, and never once interrupted the speaker. The expulsion bloc relaxed. Perhaps, they thought, the humans had learned their lesson. They had not. Behind the scenes, far from the crystal halls of Valith Prime, Mwangi was doing exactly what he had been recalled to do. Not consult, fight. Deep in the hollow expanse, in the dark spaces between dead stars, Mwangi had assembled a fleet. It was not an official fleet. Earth had not authorized it. The Council certainly had not authorized it. It was a collection of battered ships held together by welding patches and stubbornness, crewed by people who had no business being there. And that was the part that made Talvori's breath catch when she finally learned the truth. They were not all human. A Drexy navigator named Sheol served on Mwangi's command ship. Her colony had been one of the 3 saved during the unauthorized battle. She had watched the Terran fleet arrive when no one else would come. She had seen human soldiers carry her injured sister to a medical shuttle. When Mwangi put out a quiet call for volunteers, Sheol answered in 11 minutes. A Keth field medic named Vorath had left his post at a council hospital. He had treated the wounded from the frontier colonies, and had watched 3 of them die because council reinforcements arrived too late. He was old by Keth standards, and his hands shook slightly, and he had never broken a rule in his life. He packed a medical kit and joined Mwangi's fleet without telling anyone. An Ulhari engineer named Gren had argued with his own ambassador in a private meeting that was later leaked to the press. "You sit here filing protests while people die," he had said. His ambassador expelled him from the delegation. Gren walked straight to the Terran embassy and asked for a ship. There were others. A Velani communications officer, 2 Drexy pilots, a young Keth scientist who had never seen combat. They came from species that were arguing about whether to expel humanity, and they came anyway, because the humans had done something no other species had managed in the history of the galaxy. They had not just made allies, they had made friends. Talvori discovered this through an intelligence report that crossed her desk late one night. She read the crew manifest of Mwangi's fleet 3 times. Then she sat back in her chair and understood something she had been missing for 2 years. Humans were not reckless because they were stupid. They were not aggressive because they were violent. They fought because they formed bonds. Deep, irrational, unbreakable bonds. They looked at a Drexy navigator and saw not an alien species, but a person. They treated a Keth medic not as a member of a rival faction, but as a friend. They did not calculate the political cost of loyalty. They simply gave it, freely and completely, and they expected nothing in return. And when those friends were in danger, they would do anything, break any law, cross any line, fight any enemy, to protect them. It was beautiful. It was also terrifying. The swarm made its move on a quiet morning, when the light of Valith Prime's star was golden, and the council chamber was half empty. Long-range sensors detected a massive force emerging from the hollow expanse. Thousands of swarm ships, moving in perfect coordination, aimed directly at the heart of the galaxy. They were coming for Valith Prime. The Council panicked. The Measured Response Fleet was deployed along the frontier, days away. Local defense forces were designed to handle pirates, not an extinction-level swarm. Emergency messages went out to every species, but the fastest reinforcements were still too far. The only force close enough to intercept was Mwangi's illegal, unauthorized, technically criminal guerrilla fleet. The irony was not lost on anyone. Dr. Osei received the intelligence in her embassy. She stood very still for exactly 4 seconds. Then she changed out of her diplomatic clothes, put on a simple gray suit, and walked to the council chamber. The session was chaos. Delegates were shouting. Some were calling for evacuation. The Ulhari ambassador was demanding that every available ship be pulled back to protect his own territory. No one was listening to anyone. Dr. Osei walked to the center of the floor. She did not ask for permission to speak. She simply stood there, still and calm, until the noise died. "I will be brief," she said. "The swarm is coming. Your fleet is out of position. The only ships that can reach Valith Prime in time belong to a man you tried to expel and a crew of volunteers you never approved." The chamber was silent. "Captain Mwangi is ready to fight. His crew, human and otherwise, is ready to die for this world and everyone on it. They have been ready since the day they left, because that is what they do. Not because you asked them to. Not because you deserve it. Because someone has to, and they decided it would be them." She looked at the Ulhari ambassador. He did not look away. "You can expel us after the battle," she said. "You can file your protests and your sanctions and your formal complaints. But right now, in this moment, you need to decide. Do you want allies who follow your rules, or do you want allies who save your lives?" The vote was called immediately. It was not close. The resolution passed with every delegation voting in favor except 3 who abstained. For the first time in the history of the Galactic Council, the words Joint Terran Council Task Force appeared in the official record. Teilvori voted yes. She did it with shaking hands, and a feeling in her chest she could not name. It was not fear, though she was afraid. It was not hope, though she desperately hoped. It was trust, fragile and new, and completely irrational. She was trusting humans. She sent a private message to Mwangi's fleet. It contained no formal language, no diplomatic phrasing, no official authorization codes, just 4 words. "We are counting on you." The reply came back in seconds. It was from Mwangi. It was even shorter. "Coming." Teilvori looked out her window at the peaceful sky of Valith Prime and wondered how much of it would be left by tomorrow. They came out of the dark like a tide. The swarm filled the sensors of every ship in orbit. Thousands of organic vessels, each one pulsing with the cold intelligence of the hive mind, moving in perfect formation. They blotted out the stars. They made no demands. They sent no warnings. They simply came, and everything in their path was meant to die. Valith Prime had never seen war. The Council's homeworld was a place of crystal towers and ancient gardens and diplomatic halls, where the most violent thing that had ever happened was a strongly worded trade embargo. Its orbital defenses were ceremonial. Its population of 4 billion had never heard an air raid siren. They heard one now. Mwangi's fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel directly between the swarm and the planet. 37 ships held together by welding patches, borrowed parts, and what Mwangi himself called duct tape and spite. Against the swarm's thousands, they looked like pebbles thrown at an ocean. Mwangi opened a channel to every ship in his fleet. His voice was calm, tired, but calm. "Everyone knows the plan. We hold the line until the Council fleet arrives. That is 12 hours. We do not retreat. We do not break. We buy time, and we make it expensive for them. If your ship goes down, you get to a pod. If your pod goes down, you grab a suit. If your suit fails, you hold your breath, and you keep fighting. That is what we do. That is who we are. A pause, then quieter. It has been an honor serving with every single one of you. The swarm hit them like a wall. The first hour was pure chaos. Wangi had organized his fleet into rotating defensive clusters, each one led by a different species. The Drexy pilots were fastest, darting between swarm ships and drawing fire away from the larger vessels. The Alhari engineer Gren had modified the shields on 6 ships to pulse at a frequency that disrupted swarm boarding tendrils. The Keth medic Vorath ran between decks on the command ship, treating wounded crew members from 4 different species with hands that no longer shook. Humans held the center. They always held the center. The Terran destroyers took the worst of the assault. They absorbed wave after wave of swarm attacks, pulling the enemy's focus while the flanking groups hit from the sides. Ships burned, hulls cracked, crew members died, and still they held. On the surface of Valith Prime, Dr. Osei coordinated the civilian evacuation. 4 billion people needed to move to underground shelters, and the infrastructure had never been designed for this. Transit systems overloaded. Communication networks crashed. Panic spread faster than information. Osei set up a command center in the council building's basement. She had no military training. She had no combat experience. She was a diplomat with a doctorate in interspecies law, and a talent for staying calm when everyone around her was screaming. She directed evacuation routes, managed resource distribution, and kept the emergency channels open when the main systems failed. Then, the swarm breached the orbital line. A cluster of smaller swarm creatures broke through the fleet's defensive perimeter, and began descending toward the planet's surface. They hit the ground near the council district. Ulhari security forces moved to intercept, but these soldiers had trained for crowd control and VIP protection, not for fighting an alien swarm. Every instinct, every bit of training, every part of their rigid military doctrine failed them, because nothing in the manual covered this. Osei watched the security feed from the basement. She watched the Ulhari soldiers stand motionless as the swarm creatures advanced down the corridor toward the civilian shelters. She picked up a weapon from a fallen guard station. It was heavy in her hands. She had never fired anything in her life. She walked into the corridor and opened fire. She was not accurate. She was not graceful. She missed more than she hit. But she stood in that corridor, a small human woman with a too-big weapon, and she did not move. The swarm creatures came, and she fired, and she screamed, and she kept firing. The Ulhari soldiers watched her. Something in them broke open, something old and proud and buried under centuries of protocol. Their commander raised his weapon. "Forward," he said. They charged. The Ulhari ambassador, watching the security feed from a shelter deep underground, saw his own soldiers following a human diplomat into battle. He opened his mouth and closed it again. He had no words. Above the planet, the battle reached its breaking point. Mwangi's fleet had held for 8 hours. More than half his ships were gone. The survivors were damaged, low on ammunition, running on emergency power. The swarm kept coming. Then Shial, the Drexy navigator, found something. She had been tracking swarm movement patterns since the battle began, mapping every attack wave, every flanking maneuver, every shift in formation. The swarm moved as one mind, but every mind had a center. "Captain," she said, her voice tight with exhaustion and excitement, "I found the queen." The swarm queen was a massive organic structure at the center of the hive fleet. It was a living brain, kilometers across, pulsing with the signals that coordinated every creature in the swarm. Destroy it, and the hive mind would collapse. Vorath, the Queth medic, confirmed it. He had been studying swarm biology from tissue samples collected during the battle. "It is biological," he said, "not mechanical. It can be killed, but someone would have to get inside." Everyone on the bridge knew what that meant. Mwangi looked at his crew. Humans, Drexy, Queth, Ulhari, Villani, species that had been arguing about trade routes and diplomatic protocols just months ago, now bleeding and dying together in the dark, above a world that was not home to any of them. "I need volunteers for a boarding mission," he said. "I will not lie to you. The odds of coming back are very small." Every hand went up. Mwangi picked a team of 12. They loaded into a shuttle that Gren had reinforced with every piece of armor plating he could strip from the dying fleet. It was ugly. It was barely functional. Gren called it his masterpiece. The shuttle punched through the swarm's defensive layer. It was hit 14 times on the way in. 2 of the team were killed before they reached the Queen's outer membrane. The rest cut their way inside. The interior of the Queen was alive. Walls pulsed. The air was thick and warm and smelled of something ancient. The team moved through corridors of living tissue, fighting swarm guardians at every turn. They lost 3 more people in the first chamber, then 2 more in the second. Mwangi and 5 others reached the core. The Queen was there, and she was not what they expected. She was sapient. She had eyes, or something like eyes, vast and dark and filled with an intelligence that was older than any civilization in the galaxy. She looked at the battered, bleeding humans and aliens standing before her, and she spoke. Her voice was not sound. It was pressure in the mind, words forming from pure thought. "Why?" she asked. "You are small. You are young. These species have rejected you. They have tried to expel you. They do not want you. Why do you fight for them?" Mwangi stood in the heart of an ancient alien god, bleeding from a dozen wounds, holding a weapon that suddenly seemed very small. "Because somebody has to," he said. The Queen studied him. Something that might have been confusion, or might have been respect, moved through her vast mind. "You will die for them," she said. It was not a question. "Probably," Mwangi said, "but not today." The charges detonated. The Queen's death scream tore through the hive mind like a shockwave. Across the battle, swarm creatures convulsed, lost coordination, crashed into each other. Ships that had been attacking in perfect formation suddenly spun aimlessly. The hive was broken. Mwangi's team barely made it back to the shuttle. Gren pulled them out, flying with one hand, because the other was holding a hull breach closed with his bare palm. They cleared the collapsing Queen structure with seconds to spare. Mwangi was alive. Barely. His left arm was shattered. 3 ribs were broken. He had lost enough blood that Vorath later said it was a miracle he was still conscious. "Not a miracle," Mwangi whispered, "just stubborn." The Council fleet arrived 2 hours later. They found the swarm scattered and broken, drifting in pieces around a planet that was battered but alive. The battle was over. The cost was enormous. Thousands dead across every species. Ships that would never fly again. Scars on the surface of Valith Prime that would take generations to heal. It was the worst day in the history of the Galactic Council, but they were alive. In the silence that followed, as wreckage drifted through the dark and rescue ships moved between the ruins, every communication channel in the fleet picked up the same signal. It was faint. It was coming from the shattered hull of a Terran cruiser, floating without power near the planet's rings. It was music. A single soldier, wounded and alone in the wreckage, was playing a harmonica. The melody was slow and simple and impossibly sad, drifting through the void on an open channel that reached every ship, every station, every shelter on the planet below. Tailvori heard it in her shelter beneath the council building. She had spent 12 hours coordinating emergency communications, directing rescue efforts, and holding together a government that was falling apart. She was exhausted beyond anything she had felt in 4 centuries of life. She thought about the small, battered fleet that had stood between her world and extinction. She thought about Mwangi, bleeding in the heart of an alien god, saying, "Because somebody has to." For the first time in her 400-year career, Ambassador Tailvori wept. 6 months passed. The crystal towers of Valith Prime were rebuilt, but they were not the same. New materials filled the cracks where swarm creatures had torn through walls. Scorch marks had been polished away, but if you looked closely, you could still see where the stone was slightly different in color. The planet wore its scars quietly, the way old soldiers do. The council chamber was repaired last. The living crystal had been damaged during the battle, and the engineers said it would take years to fully heal. In the meantime, it hummed at a slightly different pitch than before. Lower, sadder. Some delegates said it sounded like mourning. Others said it sounded like something stronger. The seats were arranged in their ancient order when the council convened for the first time since the battle. But not all of them were filled. Empty chairs marked the delegates who had been lost. Empty sections marked the species whose homeworlds had fallen during the swarm's advance. No one moved to fill those spaces. They were left open, a reminder of what the galaxy had paid. The chamber was quieter than Tailvori had ever heard it. 300 species gathered in one room, and not a single voice rose above a whisper. There was no arguing, no political maneuvering, no ancient grudges or trade disputes, just the soft sound of beings who had survived something terrible and were still learning how to breathe again. The Alhari ambassador rose first. He was the same massive, armor-plated creature who had led the expulsion block, the same one who had demanded humanity be removed from the council, the same one who had filed 17 formal protests in a single day. He stood at his podium, and the chamber waited. He did not speak immediately. His 4 eyes moved across the room, settling on faces he had known for decades. Then they moved to the human section, where a familiar figure sat with a dented coffee container and a crooked grin. "I wish to address the council regarding my previous motions to expel the Terran delegation," the Ulhari ambassador said. His voice was rough, heavy, like every word cost him something. "I withdraw them, all of them, every protest, every complaint, every formal objection." He paused. "I watched the battle from a shelter beneath this building. I watched my own soldiers freeze in the face of the enemy. And I watched a human woman, a diplomat, not a warrior, pick up a weapon and stand in a corridor alone because my people would not. I watched her fight. I watched my soldiers follow her. I watched them remember who they were, because a human showed them first." The chamber was completely silent. "My species does not apologize easily. We are proud, perhaps too proud. But I owe a debt that pride cannot cover." The Alhari ambassador stepped out from behind his podium. He walked to the center of the chamber floor. He faced the human delegation, and then he did something that no Alhari had done for an outsider species in 10,000 years. He bowed. It was deep and slow and absolute. His massive frame folded forward until his armored head nearly touched the floor. In Alhari culture, this was not a gesture of submission. It was a gesture of recognition. It meant, "I see you. I see what you are, and I honor it." Mwangi stood. He looked uncomfortable, which was rare for him. He was not used to being honored. He was used to being yelled at. He nodded at the Alhari ambassador with a respect that was simple and genuine, and the Alhari rose. Tailvori was called to the floor next. She had spent weeks preparing her report. But when she stood before the council, she set her notes aside. I have been asked to present the Council's formal reassessment of humanity, she said. I will keep it brief, because I have learned from the humans that sometimes fewer words carry more weight. She activated the display behind her. On it appeared humanity's original intelligence file. The words were stark and clinical. Unpredictable. Approach with caution. She let the delegates read it. Then she changed the display. This is the updated assessment. The new words appeared on the screen. Chaotic, loyal, dangerous to their enemies, more dangerous to themselves, indispensable. A murmur moved through the chamber, not disagreement, something closer to recognition. The humans are not perfect allies, Tailvori continued. They are loud, they break protocols, they act without authorization. They make messes that take years to clean up. They drink stimulants in diplomatic chambers and play music during battles, and form emotional attachments with a speed that frankly concerns our psychologists. A few quiet laughs. But they are also the reason we are standing in this chamber today. Not because they are the strongest species, or the smartest, or the most advanced, but because when the darkness came, they ran toward it. They did not wait for permission. They did not calculate the cost. They did not ask what they would get in return. They simply went, and they fought, and they bled, and they held the line, until the rest of us remembered how to stand. She looked at Mwangi. He was staring at his coffee container. I do not fully understand humans, she said. I suspect I never will. But I am grateful they are on our side. She stepped down. The council voted that afternoon. It was unanimous. A new position was created, the first of its kind in the council's 10,000-year history. Humanity was named the council's permanent first responders. When disaster struck, when enemies appeared, when everything went wrong, and the careful plans of careful species fell apart, humans would be called first. It was the highest honor the council could give. It was also the most dangerous job in the galaxy. Everyone understood that these two things were the same. Mwangi was called to accept. He walked to the center of the chamber floor. He looked different from the man who had first arrived 2 years ago, with his combat boots and his coffee and his baffling habit of solving other people's problems. He was thinner, older. His left arm was in a sling. He walked with a cane that he obviously hated. A new scar ran from his temple to his jaw. But the boots were the same. And the grin was the same. He looked around the chamber at 300 species watching him. Allies, friends, people he had fought for and beside, and sometimes against. He cleared his throat. I am not very good at speeches, he said. That was always Dr. Osei's department. She is better with words. I am better with, well, with making a mess and hoping it works out. A few more laughs, warmer this time. I accept this honor on behalf of every human who served and every human who did not come home. And on behalf of every non-human who chose to stand with us when their own governments told them not to. Shial, Vorath, Gren, and the ones we lost. They deserve this more than I do. He paused. The grin faded into something more serious. I want to be honest with you. We are going to be terrible at this. We are going to track mud through your nice halls. We are going to break your protocols and ignore your committees and probably set something on fire. We are going to do things that make you angry and confused and exhausted. He looked at Tailvori. She raised one of her 6 eyebrows. But when the next thing comes out of the dark, and something always does, we will be there first. We will hold the line. We will buy you time. And we will not stop until every last person we care about is safe. He raised his coffee container. That is what humans do. The chamber erupted. Not in argument, not in protest, in something that had no precedent in the council's history. Applause. Not the polite formal acknowledgement that delegates normally gave. Hands and claws and tentacles and appendages that had no name in human language, all moving together, making noise for no strategic reason, expressing something that words could not capture. Humans had taught them that too. That evening, Talvori sat in her private chamber for the last time. She was retiring. 4 centuries of service was enough. The galaxy had changed, and she wanted to see what it became from a distance. She opened her personal log and began her final entry. I have served this council for 400 years. I have seen empires rise and fall. I have seen species born and extinguished. I have survived wars and plagues and crises that shook the foundations of galactic civilization. She paused, looking out her window at the lights of Valith Prime. In the courtyard below, she could see figures moving, human and alien, walking together, talking, laughing. They are crude, reckless, sentimental, and utterly impossible. They solve problems that are not theirs. They fight battles that are not theirs. They love people they have no reason to love, and they do it with a ferocity that frightens me. She watched Mwangi below, walking with Sheol and Vorath and Gren through the courtyard. He was showing them something on his communicator. They were laughing. Gren, who had never laughed in public in his entire life, was laughing. They are also the reason this council still stands, the reason this planet still turns, the reason I am sitting here, alive, writing these words. She saved the entry. Then she added one final line. I do not understand them. I suspect I never will. But the galaxy is better because they are in it. And I am proud, deeply, terrifyingly, irrationally proud, to call them allies. She closed the log and turned off the light. Somewhere in the rebuilt corridors of Valith Prime, the smell of coffee drifted through air that had once tasted of war. It mixed with the hum of living crystal that was slowly healing, and the sound of footsteps from a dozen different species walking together down a hall that had almost been destroyed. The galaxy was scarred. It was tired. It was changed in ways that would take generations to fully understand. But it was alive. And it was, for the first time in a very long time, just a little bit safer. Because somewhere out there, wearing combat boots and carrying bad coffee and grinning at the darkness, the humans were keeping watch. And they were not going anywhere.